Hello,
Over to you, Tamara.
everyone. You can see people are joining now. Welcome to the webinar. As many of you are here today because you're all interested in the rapidly emerging field of precision medicine. And as we're all aware, more complex, expensive, and promising genetic and genomic tests are being developed to identify biomarkers that can help inform treatment and care, but currently most prominently in the field of oncology. Today, we'll be sharing the progress that has been made in standing up a time limited advisory panel tasked with developing a consensus based framework to support standardized, efficient, and transparent assessment of genetic and genomic biomarkers in cancer care in Canada. At the end of today's session, we really hope that you'll understand the scope of this work and learn how you can provide feedback on the draft framework, which will be, we anticipate, available for your review in July 2025. My name's Tamara Rader. I'm an engagement officer at Canada's Drug Agency, and I'd like to begin with a territorial acknowledgement. I'm located in the area that we now call Ottawa, which is the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. And if you've ever been to this place, you know how important the Ottawa River is to our geography. And I live very close to where the Rideau River flows into the Ottawa River. And when I'm out walking along, I'm often reminded that the Anishinaabe people are the traditional keepers of this local watershed since time before recorded history. I encourage everyone here today to similarly reflect on the land where you live. We are very glad to have participants registered from across Canada from many, many beautiful places. So please feel free to share where you're located in the chat if you'd like to. And just as there are many very, very beautiful places across Canada, there are also many excellent Indigenous organizations working to improve the lives of their community members. To give a shout out to one of our organizations near to me, as a personal act of reconciliation today and in honor of this webinar, I have the opportunity to make this a land acknowledgement. I have also made a donation to Minwashin Lodge. It is a local women's support center and shelter that provides a range of programs and services to women with children or not, who are survivors of domestic and other forms of violence, and who may also be suffering the effects of the residential school system. I believe that these collective small actions by individuals can have a big impact. Today, we will be offering simultaneous interpretation and live captioning in both official languages. My colleagues will put the link in the chat so you can access this. This link will open up into a new browser with the audio captioning in your choice of English or French. If you have any trouble, please reach out to the CDA AMC events team in the chat and they'll try and help. Our speaker today is Laura Weeks. Laura is the Director of the Health Technology Assessment in the Evidence Products and Services Department of Canada's Drug Agency. Laura, would you like to begin our session and share more about the work of the advisory panel, the progress to date, and the plans for the coming months?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tamara. And thanks so much to everyone who is able to join today. We appreciate your time and your interest to hear more about the work that we are doing to support the development of a consensus-based assessment framework intended to support decisions about the adoption and funding of testing for biomarkers in cancer care. So to begin, and as Tamara has already alluded, we have entered the age of precision medicine. We are seeing more complex drug treatments emerge that are tailored for individuals with particular genetic or genomic profiles. And an understanding of an individual's genetic makeup is now informing a range of therapeutic decisions. So it really is an exciting time in care where we have the potential to observe enhanced patient outcomes and reduce adverse effects by offering targeted treatments to the right person at the right time. That said, precision medicine is a process, and it requires not only safe, effective, targeted therapies, but we also require access to biomarker testing so that we can determine an individual's genetic profile, for example, and identify who might be eligible or not for different targeted therapies, and otherwise to tailor treatments based on genetic information. And it's really only when this process comes together that we can realize the potential benefits of precision medicine. Our systems at the moment, unfortunately, do expose some potential gaps within this process, and that's really the primary driver for the work that we all discussed today. I'm sure most of you are aware that in Canada, we do have a relatively well-defined process that guides regulatory and reimbursement decisions for novel drug therapies, but that's not necessarily the case for the associated testing requirements that support the appropriate use of those novel drug therapies. Um, and so to inform our work, we first conducted an environmental scan, and we published this in March of this year, of existing biomarker assessment practices, as well as different criteria and frameworks that are being used across the country. And what we identified is that processes vary across different provincial and territorial jurisdictions, and at times even within jurisdictions. We learned that many or all jurisdictions acknowledge the need for a process to inform the assessment of biomarkers, to inform decisions about adoption and funding, and that some are further ahead than others in their implementation of such a process. We also heard some common challenges across jurisdictions. For example, that there are typically different funders and different decision makers that support decisions around targeted therapies, for example, novel drugs, and the biomarker testing requirements, and that these systems are not always aligned or coordinated. And why this matters is that it limits access or timely access, equitable access to novel drug treatments and other targeted therapies, which can limit equitable opportunities to experience the potential benefits of precision medicine. And so it's within this context that we have stood up our advisory panel and are supporting the development of a consensus-based assessment framework to help inform decisions about the funding and adoption of testing for various biomarkers in cancer care. So this is the primary objective of the advisory panel, who also has secondary objectives to share best practices and learn from one another, to support implementation of the framework within jurisdictions, as well as to engage different interested parties across jurisdictions to work towards consensus. I will have a more detailed timeline slide in a minute, but for now, we'll just flag that we are anticipating that the framework should be ready for implementation within jurisdictions in the fall of this year, targeting perhaps September to start that conversation. I wanted to give kudos and a huge thanks to our advisory panel members, many of who are shown here on the screen, who have been nothing but short of amazing and a really thoughtful and engaged group. I did want to flag for participants today that when identifying panel members, we were very intentional in our approach, and we wanted to identify people that represented a diversity in roles and perspectives across the health system, and also ensuring diversity across jurisdictions and other dimensions of difference, and also keeping an eye on a manageable panel size. So in the end, in total, we engaged 14 advisory panel members, including a chair. And we also included one observer from INES, so the HTA organization in Quebec. On this slide, I wanted to describe some of what was considered in and out of scope for the advisory panel. So for example, the panel considered all types of biomarkers to be in scope, including predictive and prognostic markers, those that might be used to detect disease or recurrence or to monitor treatment response, and including both germline and hereditary mutations. We also intend the framework to support decisions about biomarker testing that's not yet standard of care, so for those new and novel biomarkers, and also to support decisions about existing biomarker testing. So, for example, to revisit decisions about the use of existing tests, to potentially reassess or to support decisions as well about testing for new indications based on a biomarker that might already be tested for in certain scenarios. We do not intend the framework to support any decisions about the location of testing. So, for example, whether that testing should happen within a province or whether it should be conducted out of jurisdiction. Within the framework, we will be presenting criteria to assess biomarkers, but the framework will not support any recommendations about how to conduct that testing. For example, using what platforms or assays. We acknowledge that these decisions about how to implement testing is very much based on the local context and what might be currently available or possible, and so without a scope for the advisory panel and the framework. Last, we do expect that the framework will lead to some identification of implementation considerations, but we would not expect any implementation rules or requirements to flow from the framework, again, considering those primarily to be in jurisdictional purview. And then last, I wanted to be clear again that the framework at the moment is intended to be implemented within jurisdictions, so to complement or to be adopted within existing processes to support a more coordinated or consistent approach across jurisdictions. So while we at Canada's Drug Agency are supporting the development of a framework from a pan-Canadian perspective, acknowledging the challenges as we outlined sort of at the beginning of our time together in terms of consistency and transparency and equity in access, the scope is for jurisdictions to implement the final product. And then last, and before opening the floor to hear your questions and comments, I just wanted to overview the process that the advisory panel has been taking to support framework development. So first, we've had a schedule of 4 meetings, pretty much monthly meetings, so beginning in late February. And the last meeting is fast approaching next week at the beginning of June. For each of these meetings, Canada's Drug Agency has developed a set of materials to support the advisory panel discussions, building from input received by the panel through the course of their work. And then the meetings and the content have really built from one another, progressing from a discussion of scope to current practices and opportunities to learn from one another towards a draft framework and then working towards a final draft early in June. As part of this, we do acknowledge the diversity and interested parties that are relevant to this work and really want to be sure to provide ample opportunity to hear from everyone with an interest. And so this is why we will have an extended feedback period over the course of the summer months, after which we will revise the draft based on the feedback received through that extended period before finalizing the framework in September and then shifting the conversation to one of implementation. So with that, I'll close the formal presentation component of our discussion and open the floor to hear from you. So thanks very much for your attention, and I'll look forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you, Laura. That's great. So to the audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A feature. It's located at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit them. And myself and the moderators will review these, and I'll pose some to Laura during this Q&A portion. You can feel free to submit your questions at any time during this session, and you're also very welcome to contact us after this meeting if your question wasn't answered. And I'll provide the email address at the end of the session. So as people are gathering their thoughts, Laura, maybe I'll pose the first questions. How would you anticipate that the consensus-based assessment framework will be used by decision makers?
Yeah, no, that's a great foundational question. Thanks, Tamara. So I first, I guess we'll just reiterate that decision making will remain a jurisdictional process as it is currently, and so our role has been to support the development of that framework to bring some consistency in terms of how these decisions are made within jurisdictions. And so I would anticipate that the framework would be adopted within current decision-making processes to bring some of that consistency or standardization. to the process. And yeah, just used as part of existing processes to inform decisions around adoption and to, at times, I suppose, support asks for the budget that might come with biomarker testing recommendations.
Good. Thanks a lot, Laura. Um, Another question here, maybe more technical. Would pharmacogenomic biomarkers like DYPD, UGT1A1 be in scope?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and these are some that we have heard from the partners that we've been engaging along the way. So at the moment, the scope of the framework would include any biomarker that's not currently standard of care or a biomarker that's currently tested for. But perhaps in a different indication. The DPYD one has come up. As I understand the landscape for that one in particular, I don't think there are consistent testing processes across the country, and so that would certainly make this assessment framework. Would make it qualified for use of this assessment framework that we're developing.
Great. Hopefully that answers the question there. If I may, Laura, if you could comment a little bit about if anyone who's attending today was interested in providing feedback, how do you anticipate that feedback will be used to influence the framework or any of the work of the panel?
Sure. I mean, so we'll have an extended feedback period. We will read all of it. I will certainly commit to that. And just by way of transparency, we will also commit to publishing all of the feedback that we receive. Just to be clear to the community, sort of the feedback that we received and how we would have responded to it. All of the feedback will be brought to the panel to consider how we might revise the draft before a final version is published.
Great, thank you. A question from the audience. Can you help us understand what is meant by genetic and genomic biomarkers? What about morphologic biomarkers like TROP2, QCS, or Ki67? What about biomarkers like response to neoadjuvant immunotherapy assessed by traditional H&E? I'm sorry, I don't know H&E.
That's fine. And I will say this is a little outside of my scope and why we have engaged a lot of experts in this community to help guide our work. But as I understand the questions and some of the biomarkers that are being referred to, perhaps genetic and genomic might be too narrow of a term. I don't have the question in front of me, Tamara, to
Oh,
repeat
yes.
back the specific ones that were mentioned, but I can say that some of the words that I did hear, the panel has been discussing and certainly would be eligible. So really what we have been talking about are different biomarkers that are used to inform decisions around treatment initiation or eligibility assessment or disease monitoring or recurrence. So perhaps the genetic and genomic, I think what I'm hearing from the question might be too narrow of a term, but we do not intend it to be used that narrowly.
Okay, to the person who asked the question, if you want to follow up, that would be great. I'll pass those on. Hopefully that helps, or we can also follow up after the meeting if there's something specific. Laura, I have two questions a bit about process. So they're kind of the same, but I'll read them both. And the first one is, this process must be going on in parallel in other jurisdictions. Are there collaborations planned, and where does Canada stand compared with these peer countries?
Yeah, no,
I'll start there.
sure. No, that's fine. So yeah, at first I thought it might be in parallel with other jurisdictions in Canada, but as I understand the question, it's broader internationally as well.
Seems to be, yes.
So certainly, I mean, in terms of what's going on in Canada, we do have representation across our advisory panel and otherwise engaged with the provinces and territories. So the work that's happening already within those jurisdictions, we intend the framework to complement those processes within the country. And then outside of Canada as well, I guess I will say that we maintain probably more informal kind of collaborations with different organizations. I mean, not to put anybody, I guess, necessarily in the spotlight or on the spot, but, we do have conversation with Singapore, who is developing a similar process at this time. Um, I think the processes really need to be tailored to individual countries and societal values and existing processes and whatnot. So while we certainly are following what's going on in other jurisdictions internationally, I think it's important that we develop a framework that works for Canada and for Canadians.
Great. And I guess the second part of that question was where Canada stands and compared to with peer countries, but I'm not sure if you're able to comment on that.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how we define peers. I
Hmm.
suppose. We tend to collaborate with the UK, for example. I know NICE, the HTA body in the UK, does have a process like this. HAS, the Haute Autorité Santé, in France, has a process, and so these are some that we have been gathering some information from as well to support our development. So I think it's a current conversation across different countries. Some are certainly further ahead, just given sort of where they are in terms of the structure of HTA and assessment processes, and others ongoing.
Hmm. So more collaboration rather than a comparison necessarily.
Nice way.
Um, yeah, so now there's a couple of questions about coordination. The first one, does this biomarker testing framework coordinate with the CDA drug review HDA process in any way? And a follow-up question would be, is a lot of interprovincial disparity, and how will CDA AMC influence the adoption of companion diagnostic testing with reimbursement decisions? So I think both questions are getting at sort of our role as Canada's drug agency and how the biomarker testing fits with the work that we do in pharmaceutical reviews.
Well, fantastic. Um, so I think some of the details of the answer to that question, I'll probably pause until the framework is available in July. I don't think it'll be any surprise to say that it certainly is top of mind to ensure that these processes are coordinated so that there can be more aligned decisions in terms of when, like companion diagnostic, for example, biomarker recommendations are made forward. So there's similar timing for recommendation for the drug as well as the assessed testing requirements. So that's something that's under conversation. With the panel, and should have some recommendations within the framework that emerges. Um, and then one other, I guess, perhaps piece of information to flag for this group, just in case they're unaware, a program of work that we had started at Canada's Drug Agency over the past year has been what we're calling our testing procedure assessment program. So this is sort of in anticipation or in awareness of the novel testing requirements that have been appearing around more of the drug treatments that have been coming through for reimbursement review. And so what we have been preparing is what we call a testing procedure assessment report. And this is looking at such things like access and availability and funding of different tests across the country. Taking a brief look at clinical utility and validity, impact on patients and caregivers, as well as some cost considerations. And so what we have been doing over the past year is bringing these more structured assessments of testing requirements forward to our drug reimbursement review committee so that they are considering testing requirements when deliberating on and making recommendations for drug reimbursement reviews. So there already is that alignment with bringing that testing information forward within the drug reimbursement review process. And we are seeing some recommendations show up within those drug reimbursement reviews that consider feasibility of adoption, for example, of the different testing requirements if a drug were to be reimbursed. So we already are working towards that alignment. And then it is our intention, once we do have this framework available, to refine our testing procedure assessment program so that it aligns with the consensus framework that is put out by this panel. So moving towards even more of an aligned process. I think where we are at the moment, given funding and approval processes for biomarkers, it's a different audience and a different budget, as I sort of alluded to in one of my slides for the drugs versus the biomarkers. And so we're not at a space in Canada in terms of our system for the drug reimbursement review recommendations to also include reimbursement for biomarkers, because it's a different funder. But certainly on our radars for awareness and something to consider for future system coordination and alignment.
Thanks, Laura. And you touched on this briefly, but there is a question about whether or not there's a plan or timeline for reviewing this process as precision medicine landscape evolves. So I know that you talked about revising in terms of from a coordination standpoint, but as the science changes, is there a plan to review the framework and revise it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll say something we haven't explicitly discussed yet, but I think is very much on the back of our minds in our work plan. It's one of these lines, don't forget to build in an implementation and evaluation plan. I will say that we're aware that this is the first step of a much bigger kind of conversation in terms of types of testing requirements in other disease areas as well. And so, the approach that we do tend to take at the organization is to implement, to test, to evaluate, to refine over time. And I don't think this would be any different of a circumstance, especially considering how fast the science is evolving. So I think that's sort of like an evaluation of the framework itself and how that's being implemented and used and how useful it might be within jurisdictions. But then also, and I wasn't sure if there was a hint of this in the question as well, that we would intend the framework as well to be used to support reassessment of current tests, for example. So it could be used if there is a current test and we might want to evaluate whether or not that might still be appropriate in the given context, and the framework itself could be used to revisit those implementation or funding decisions as well.
Great, thank you. I think that does touch on that broad question about the precision medicine landscape and its evolution. If I could just circle back to the scope for a moment, Laura, will the scope include biomarkers that are vital to diagnosis or prognosis that are not linked to a drug? Would those be included?
Yes, absolutely. No, that's a really good question, and something that the panel has been very clear about. I think companion diagnostics do tend to be one of those things that are top of mind for many folks, but I think we hear loud and clear that there are other biomarkers that are used to inform other types of decisions that are not adjacent to a drug, and very much we intend the framework to include those as well.
Great, thank you. And I guess this is sort of looking to the future also. Are there plans for this framework to expand beyond cancer care for other precision medicines that are non-oncology and do require genomic tests?
Yeah, that's a great question too. Yeah, we did need to start somewhere so as to not try and boil the ocean, and I think also there's a little bit of stock of how our health systems are organized, with many jurisdictions having cancer agencies that manage those budgets, and other budgets for other disease areas. And so to reach the decision about starting with cancer, we were really considerate of where many of the novel drug treatments and precision medicines are emerging. And most of these we had identified to be in the field of cancer. And so that is how we sort of arrived at that decision to begin with cancer. But certainly anticipate that, again, this is sort of the first step, and that a next step would be to refine the framework for use in other disease areas as well.
Okay, thanks, Laura. That is a good question. I think we've had that before as well. So thank you for raising that very much. Someone has shared a comment, Laura, and maybe what I'll do is read it out and see if you have any comment to make in return, but also just so that we note it for this webinar, as it's quite an important comment here. Um, and apologies for my pronunciation on some of these. DPYD testing only includes alleles for Western and Northern European ethnicities in Ontario. Yet 60% of Toronto is a visible minority population. And the person makes the comment that there have been 2 deaths so far since being tracked in 2023 at Sunnybrook because of lack of inclusiveness of these that cover other ethnicities, which could be easily included with a full gene testing, which is less than $300, or uracil testing, which is $50. So the comment, I think, is about whether the testing available is encompasses everything it needs to reflect the population of Toronto for sure, and across Canada.
Yeah, that is actually a great comment, and one that I'll say that I'm actually familiar with because we do have ongoing related work happening in that space. So I would encourage anyone who's interested to keep an eye out. We are currently doing an assessment of DPYD testing, and the impetus for that was the unfortunate events really that had happened in Ontario and I think other parts of the country as well. So maybe a little bit outside of scope of the particular conversation around, how this assessment framework would be used. Yes, it would be used to support decisions around DPYD testing. Um, uh, and again, I think we need to wait until the framework is available to indicate how specifically different equity issues and ethnic backgrounds, will be reflected within the assessment framework. But I guess I don't think I'm telling too many secrets by saying that it is top of mind for the panel, equity being a key consideration, and trying to ensure that the framework and the recommendations that come from the framework support decisions equitably for everybody living in Canada. And yeah, and just so again, please keep an eye out on our website for when the report on DPYT testing is available. What we had looked at in that report is both phenotypic and genotypic testing. So we have been looking at the specific alleles in the research to support testing for different alleles, as well as the urine tests. And yeah, again, I don't have the specific the terminology, the technicalities in front of me, but we were interested in both genotypic and phenotypic testing. With our understanding, I think that the phenotypic testing might be less prone to those ethnic biases or ethnic backgrounds. I hope
Thanks,
I hope
thanks.
that touches
Yeah,
on it.
I
Yeah,
hope
it
it does,
is.
because we have a second question on the same topic about whether the framework will address these concerns. But I'm going to just read out the comment because just to capture it for the recording, and for the knowledge of everyone listening. The person writes, racial and ethnic differences have been observed in cancer biomarker levels. Inequities in cancer care can apply not just to inaccessibility of genetic tests for some communities, but a lack of tests targeting relevant biomarkers for those communities, and
Yeah.
even poor identification of such biomarkers. And I think that you've covered that mainly in your comments in the earlier for the earlier question. But if you wanted to add anything about whether the framework would address those concerns, or if that's something else that we would have to wait and see until the framework is complete.
Yeah, I think it's best to say wait and see. And just for awareness, like it is something the panel is discussing, but how it actually shows up within the framework, I think that that's more of a wait and see type question. But yeah, I don't think it's uh we're well aware of the unfortunate, I guess, biases that are inherent to a lot of the data that we have to inform these sorts of decisions.
Thanks, Laura. Would you have any comment about how the extra layer of assessment might negatively impact the speed at which a new biomarker is adopted?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, and I guess my response is we don't necessarily see this as a barrier, and in fact is, more in support of ensuring that appropriate testing is available and is available to all people in Canada who would need it. So I can appreciate that it's a different step, but I think we're taking the lens that, maybe not every test is valuable, and really want to be sure that our, the finite resources of our health system are really dedicated to those tests that would bring the most value. And so while it is, perhaps a different step, I think these decisions are currently being made in some form or another at different levels in the health system currently. And all we are trying to do is to bring some consistency and transparency and standardization in terms of how those decisions are made.
Okay, thank you. Maybe a methodological question or something for the future. What are your thoughts about including biomarker data in future modeling efforts to plan for associated system changes that may arise?
What are my thoughts about including biomarker data in modeling exercises to anticipate future changes that might
System
arise?
changes that might arise, yes.
Ooh, I don't know if sorry, I think that's might be
May not be able to answer.
a little bit outside of my scope, but I appreciated your comments before, Tamara. Like, let's keep this on the recording and something that we can certainly take back to consider for some next steps. So apologies for not being within my technical.
Yes, and to the person who made that, that has been noted, and we'll make sure that the scientific team is aware of this question, in case any comments can be made for our own work in the future.
Exactly. Thank you.
Another question that might be out of scope. First of all, just to acknowledge like a few other comments about equity and the um, inclusiveness of all nationalities and minority groups and different races and ethnicities to be able that nobody is kind of left behind there. So thank you for those comments, and they are noted also. One other question that may be out of scope, but I'll raise it. The person in the chat writes, availability of testing is important, but the hardware and personnel have to match. Maybe this is outside of the scope of Canada's drug agency, but Laura, do you have any comment about that?
Yeah, I mean, it is outside of scope of us for sure. The how to implement testing is certainly within jurisdictions and within their budgets. But I think by raising this conversation and having this assessment framework is sort of making these decisions more prominent, more prevalent, and I think recommendations that flow from the assessment framework necessarily would be made to make those budget asks. But how those decisions are ultimately made, and whether they are in consideration of the various different priorities that are going on within jurisdictions, and some might be more appropriate than others depending on existing infrastructure or what need to be new. So it is outside of our scope, but intended, or perhaps like a secondary intention to support the asks for required budgets. That if an evidence-based assessment framework leads to a decision for implementation or adoption or funding, then kind of elevates that conversation and provides the evidence to support a budget ask, I suppose.
Great, thanks, Laura, for commenting on that. And a similar comment related to that question. I don't think it's a question for you, Laura, but just something, a consideration that someone would like to raise. This person writes, it would be critical to avoid a monopoly in testing implementation, and perhaps implementation related guidance could be useful to some provinces.
Okay.
Um, I'm just sharing that as a comment. I don't think there's a question there, but just to for the benefit of everyone on the call.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for these thoughtful questions. It's slowed down a little bit, but I certainly encourage you to get in touch with us. And at the end, I'll share the ways of doing that. These questions have been really thoughtful and some that we haven't heard before. So I really appreciate everyone bringing their expertise to this Q&A session. And thank you, Laura, for sitting in the hot seat and taking these questions for
Oh,
on behalf of the team. We are all very interested in the thoughts of the community and really appreciate your answers there.
oh, it's my pleasure. It's nice to great to hear the questions that are coming from the field.
I agree, really great. Laura, would you like to share what to expect in the coming months or what people on the call could expect in the coming months?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as we have flagged, the advisory panel has their last meeting next week, so on June 5th. And after that, we'll have the work to incorporate feedback from that meeting into a final draft that we will use to support the feedback opportunity. So we do anticipate that the feedback opportunity should open in early July. We will announce that through our regular channels. So that includes like our weekly dispatch email, for example. So if you're not already part of that distribution list, then I would encourage you to visit our website to sign up so that you could be informed when the feedback period opens. And then in terms of a specific process, we'll be sharing, like, I'm not sure how many people on the call are familiar with our typical feedback process, but what we tend to do is to share a document. We'll have line numbers on it, which can hopefully support the provision of feedback directed to targeted areas within the document. You'll be able to download that. And then there would be a web-based form, and we'll have some predefined questions for you and ample space to provide any comments that you might have on the draft. Um, from there, once the feedback period closes, we'll share everything back with the advisory panel before finalizing the framework. And as I did mention, but I don't think it would hurt to reiterate it, that to support transparency, we also do intend to make publicly available any feedback that we do receive. We would be identifying any group names that provide feedback, but we would not be naming any specific individual names. So in closing, we're really hopeful that by having a 2-month feedback period, will provide ample opportunity for all interested parties to review and comment on the draft. And we hope to hear from many or all of you on the call today with your feedback as well. So happy to answer any questions about that as well, or otherwise I'll turn it back to you, Tamara.
Yeah, thanks, Laura, and thanks all for your time and attention to this project today. It's been really interesting to work together on it, and we really appreciate your time and joining us today and posing these questions. We're so happy to see such wide interest in the work. The best thing you could do is to visit our website and sign up for weekly updates to be advised of when that feedback document will be posted for your comments. And this recording of this webinar will be found on our YouTube channel in a day or two. As you have registered for the webinar, we'll send you the link to that. When you get to YouTube, you'll find that there's been 2 other similar webinars, one directed at patients and patient groups, one directed at the industry partners that we have. And although the content is the exact same, the questions and answers are slightly different. So if you wanted to watch those too to learn more, that's an option. And also, an evaluation survey will be sent. So we would appreciate your feedback on this format, on the webinar today, and the interpretation service in the both official languages if you did use it. Lastly, thank you all for attending and engaging today. And if you want to connect with us directly, please use the email address requests@cda-amc.ca. If you do that, then it'll be sorted to the right person, and we won't lose track of your message. And with that, I will close the webinar. And thank you again to Laura, our speaker, and thank you to all of you for joining today.
Great.
Bye.
Thanks, Tamara, for hosting. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Bye for now.
Bye.